I'm Karen of Wildflower Quilting, and this video is about the Convert feature in CreativeStudio 7. So I'm going to be showing you how I used Convert as I was working on this customer quilt. The quilt has been returned to the customer, so I can't show the steps on the actual quilt except for some clips and still shots that I have from a previous video I made. But I will be showing the steps, showing those to you using standalone mode. I was putting a background edge to edge behind all of these leaves and the umbrella in the center panel of this quilt. And so I was creating stitch in the ditch around each of the leaves. And then I wanted to take that pattern and turn it into a boundary so that I could use it to fill behind the appliques and not stitch over these leaf appliques. Let me show you how that worked using one example. I'll just use this one last leaf down here. Before I stitched the background, I wanted to stabilize this applique, so I created stitch in the ditch. I used draw arc to outline this leaf and then stitch the ditch so I could get that nice crisp outline around it. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, this is kind of what that process looks like. I was actually using the machine head and my needle, of course, the laser at the needle, to define my arc points. But I will show you on the screen. I've already outlined almost half of this leaf, but I'll take that draw arc and continue this process of drawing arcs to trace all the way around this leaf. And pretty soon you'll get an idea of exactly how much work this can be. Make sure you're happy with that outline and stitch it out as stitch in the ditch. And I am going to order join and then combine this leaf as one pattern. That way it's not all individual arcs and it'll be much easier to work with in a little bit. This clip from a previous video shows what the stitch out looks like using that pattern as stitch in the ditch. So this is essentially what the setup looks like on the quilt group where I set up my repeat patterns to do that edge to edge. Here you can see it's kind of hard to see, but in here we've got our leaf that I outlined and then stitched as the ditch. And I rolled the quilt up so that I could reach the entire leaf. I could mark the full leaf and then I could stitch it as one leaf. But then in order to be able to stitch the next row of my edge to edge, and I was doing this in repeat patterns, in order to do this row here, I had to roll the quilt back so that I could fit the whole row in my current quilting area. So I had to relocate this pattern. I had to relocate the leaf pattern to make sure that it was in the right place on the screen and the right place on the quilt. So I relocated that leaf to where it actually is on the quilt, and you can see that not only does it cover two different rows of my edge to edge, but it covers two different quilting areas of my edge to edge. Remember, I can't do this in edge to edge feature because I can't add patterns like this leaf outline, and there are some other restrictions that I wouldn't have been able to work with. So of course I was setting up this edge to edge, this overall quilting in repeat patterns. So I'm going to take this pattern and I'm going to toggle it as sewn for now because it does not fit in my current quilting area. I am focused on stitching this row out, but I need it to fill around and not stitch where the leaf is. So here's my leaf applique. Right now it's a pattern, and here's where we finally get to use the convert feature. It is a pattern, so I am going to right click, go down to convert, and I'm going to choose my convert option. So every one of these options that is bold is available to me because I've got a pattern on the screen that's highlighted. I can change a pattern to a trim, a boundary, an outline, or a curve. Because I also have a boundary on the screen that is highlighted, I can change that to a pattern or a trim. I'm going to ignore the boundary because I want to leave my boundary. It's just the visual of my current quilting area. I want to change the pattern into a boundary because I will be using fill feature, and fill feature requires a boundary to stitch around or to fill around, either inside or outside. So I'm going to change that pattern to a boundary, and now I've got two boundaries on the screen. And now it's an easy thing to take each of these patterns that touches this leaf, and it looks like only one is affected. I know there's a lot going on the screen and you have to kind of learn how to see through what's going on, but I've got this row right here, the row of the pattern that I want to stitch. I've got the blue outline of that leaf that's an applique, and then I've got a pattern down here, a row of patterns down here that I can ignore, and I've got my bottom boundary line. So I'm looking at where this pattern that's about to stitch overlaps my blue leaf boundary, and it looks like I got pretty lucky, and that leaf only affects one pattern, so I can make sure that that boundary is highlighted, that pattern is highlighted, and I can go to fill outside. And it gave me an error because I didn't have the right boundary highlighted. You can see which boundary is highlighted. It's my first boundary. So I need to actually use my L key to toggle over to the next boundary, which is my leaf. Now you can see it's nice and bold and highlighted. And at this point, I should be able to right click because I've got this the correct pattern highlighted, the correct boundary highlighted, and then I will go to fill outside because I want to leave the pattern that's outside of that boundary. I don't want it to stitch over the boundary. And again, it's giving me an error, so it looks like I'm going to have to take this boundary and delete it. I can redraw that easily. It's much easier than redrawing my leaf down here, of course. So let's highlight that boundary again. Let's highlight the pattern, right click, fill outside, and this time I get the result that I was looking for. So my pattern stitches up to that leaf, but not across the leaf. And it'll still stitch the first repeat all the way across that row of repeats. It just won't stitch over my leaf. So that, of course, is very cool. I am going to undo really quick and show you one kind of bonus tip. So undo. So before doing my fills, I often check how things are going to stitch out. I see how these boundaries in the pattern overlap. And sometimes I can see and hear places where I don't think it really needs to come back and restitch in these areas because the pattern will stitch to here and then over to here. It'll grab this, it'll stitch around this boundary and then clear back over to here. I don't think I need any of this to actually stitch. So I might go into Nodes View, and my trick is to just drag any part of the pattern that I don't want it to focus on into the boundary. I'm literally just using the nodes to do that. You could also divide the pattern, but I like keeping it combined so that it'll stitch continuously. So now it'll stitch down to here. It'll see nothing to go do over this way, so it won't bother bouncing around these edges. It'll just come to here, follow this boundary over to here, and then keep going. I like that a lot better. It's just cleaner. Another place that I can clean things up is when it comes to here. I don't need it to bounce over to here to pick up this point, so I can drag that inside of that leaf boundary. So now it'll come to here, and it'll bounce. It'll have to come all the way down to here to pick this up, and all the way into here to pick those up. But I could pull like this one inside. It doesn't matter what these patterns look like that are inside the boundary, because that part of the pattern gets eliminated. It does not stitch. So it doesn't matter that this is all messed up and gross looking. It only matters what's outside of that boundary. So now I've cleaned that up considerably. And I'll go ahead and do that fill again. Right click, fill outside. And at this point, I would go ahead and stitch that out. Now I'm going to get to use Convert again when I roll this quilt. Because I've gone to all of the work to create these points when I outlined this leaf with Draw Arc, it took me a little bit of time, and I want to save that effort. So instead of redrawing a new boundary when I roll the quilt, I want to be able to have this outline move with me when I roll quilt. But because relocate only works on patterns, I will need to take this boundary, go to Convert, and convert the boundary to a pattern. Now, after I've finished this whole row, and I am relocating, moving the quilt to be able to fit that last row in my quilting area, because that leaf is now a pattern, it will move with the rest of the patterns. And I don't need to stitch this leaf again. I'm just using it as my boundary, remember? So I would take that pattern, go back to Convert, and change that pattern to a boundary. So I showed you a lot of steps that helped me achieve this look on this quilt, including a couple of ways that I used Convert to save myself some time. I had already gone to all of the work of outlining each of the leaves. So using Convert to change that pattern from a design to a boundary that I could use for fill feature meant I didn't need to go to the work of outlining that leaf a second or third or fourth time. Hopefully you'll find some of this useful in your quilting. Thanks for watching, and enjoy.